right, thanks. We got quite a few people here. Thanks for everybody, especially those who already know who are here. Thanks, Tim. So you all came for a talk that we wanted to make pretty simple. I've done a lot of these before, and they're all like, here's how you start or learn ProBuilder, but most people have now figured out that it exists, that you can use it. And what I wanted to do was a special talk where I tell you all the tips and tricks and quick things that I use since I developed it, or well, originally long ago anyway. Now that's Carl Henkel. What I use to make use of it and get really things like this built up quickly and easily. So first of all, the most important one, and where we're actually seeing a lot of people miss this, is get the latest and get it off Package Manager, please. We still see a lot of people using Asset Store, but if you can, just pop open Package Manager on 18.3 or 19.1. And if you have a working internet connection, you'll see ProBuilder and list, go ahead and install it. From there, we can also go on to the next part of that. Let me grab it up here. So the next trick to using ProBuilder efficiently is just to start learning it quickly. You could jump in and just click buttons and things will happen. But we have a full, really great documentation that we'd love you to use. Right here, you can even type in, I want to know about Vertex editing or something, and it'll give you everything. Again, if your internet is working. Hooray, GDC. Cool. So let's go back. Let's keep this page that was preloaded. Again, we have this, the documentation. Please take a look there. Second, to learn, to get in quick and learn, there is a world building forum now on Unity as of somewhat recently. So you can go here and we have piles of questions already asked. You can ask your own. I'm always generally on those forums answering questions. I love to answer anything at all. And there's a sticky thread called list of tutorials, guides, etc. In here we have standard 101, ProBuilder 101, grids and polybrush as well. And further down, we've also got some extra tutorials on advanced manual UV editing and such. So please check out those. They're great. And if you have any others like these folks have, post them in and let people know as well how they can get started with that. Cool, so let's actually look at ProBuilder itself. So you've installed it, you've learned it a bit. Actually, one more thing I want to say. Please drop by the Twitter page, @ProBuilder3D. A lot of people will just send questions right on there, and sometimes they wonder if they're just bugging me. It's always good. It helps other people know we exist, and it helps others. It's nice and public. Tons of people are asking questions there, and it's great. Okay, into Unity. We only have 30 minutes, so I'm going to run through this pretty quick. The idea is that I am at the answer bar all the way back there in the learning and training section or over in Artist Tools. So I'll run through this. You guys can then come ask me questions as much as you want. We'll also have about 10 minutes after this. A lot of it is in some roundtables and such we've had, we find that the biggest questions people have, I wish I could do this or that is broken, it actually exists and it's fixed. So we want you to know these things exist. So let's talk about it. You've installed ProBuilder. You've opened up the toolbar here, and you see lots of stuff going on the left. That's the ProBuilder toolbar, right? Ignore that. That's my first bit of advice to anybody just starting. You can use ProBuilder in a very simple way just to get working. If you look at the top of your screen, you'll have the Vertex, Edge, and Face tools up here in Object. These will let you just get in and modify the elements of any object. If you're familiar with Blender, Maya, etc., this is where you'll start. It's the same. I'll just, no keyboard shortcuts. I need to click buttons. I'll click on New Shape. It'll spawn in a new shape for you. That's the only toolbar I want you to click to start. From there, use these tools and use the standard Unity methods and just start moving around, get a feel for how just a simple 3D modeler works. Next, take it a little further, hold Shift. When you hold Shift and move, you're going to do an extrusion action, which is great for building something up. I'm just doing some random stuff here. If you want to do an inset, you can do a scale shift. So these are all simple things a lot of you might already know. Don't worry, I'm going to keep getting into more complex stuff. I want to make sure we've got the basics started. I found out yesterday that some super cool devs, may or may not name them, didn't actually know this shift thing existed, even though they're making an amazing game. So it's there. Cool, you can do extrude work. You can, of course, do quite a bit from this stage. If you want to get a little further, click on the plus next to New Shape, and you're going to get the Shape panel. And a lot of you might already be used to this. I'll roll through it quick. Here you can choose all sorts of things. The crowd pleaser is always curved stairs. Those are very exciting. lots of options here. You can get in and start building without having to necessarily build up all the bits of the mesh yourself. All right. So you got the latest. You've started working in here. You can build some basic meshes, but I'm used to Blender. I'm used to Maya. I'm used to something else. I wanted to match that a little better. We have piles of preferences that are also not generally known. Go to Edit and then down to Preferences. Click on ProBuilder. So a lot of cool stuff in here. Obviously, we don't want to go through all of it. I'll tell you my favorites. Turn on and off action notifications. If you like to see a pop-up whenever something happens, exactly what you did. I welded 2 vertices, I extruded a face, turn that on or off. Script stripping will allow you to make sure all of the the singular PB mesh script is pulled off the object when you build. That's important because if you want runtime editing, which is super cool, and I'll show an example of that later, turn that off. And it means that in your game, you can actually have your players allowed to build everything just as ProBuilder works. So you have access to all our mesh tools. It's super cool. There's a whole API for that. I'll just show you the demo real quick. Why not? So looking at this game called Melon Simulator, this guy made a complete in-game level editor. It was really neat. So check that out if you want to see an example for that. It was great to see someone actually used it. Not a lot of people know it exists, and it's super useful. Scrolling down a bit further, my favorite checkbox in preferences is use Unity colors. If that's turned on, we stick to the basic Unity colors a bit. If you turn it off, I've set some super cool colors. I think they are, but you probably have better ideas. So go in there and change it depending on like what you prefer for contrast, for colors. Maybe you might be colorblind, I'm not sure. Various things, you can change those. Everything that's based what you see on the mesh. For example, I have a cube here, and I go into vertex mode. I really cannot see those very well. I can go down and change the vertex size to some enormous, horrible size if I want to. Lots of good options in there for making ProBuilder uglier or better. Your choice. Cool. So a little further down, you can also change everything about how the mesh is set up when you start. That's super important. We used to get a lot of feedback about, I wish my meshes always were static so that they get light mapped, or I wish they weren't. Why will nothing work animated? You can change individually static editor flags. You can change what the default material is, mesh collider, all sorts of things. We really want anybody to be able to set this up as they expect it to work, because of course we can't get that right every time, but you can. So jump in here and take care of that. A couple other things, they don't really matter as much. Let's jump out of that. So this toolbar itself, you can do a bit as well. Again, at this point, you're already using ProBuilder. You're starting to get used to it. If you hold Shift on here, you can get some neat tooltips. They even will show a shortcut if it has one. But if you become a lot more advanced with the tool, you don't need to use up so much pixel space on the side. You can right-click in here at any point and choose icon mode, my favorite, and then just really squish that toolbar down, get it out of your way. Even further, you can pull that out. You can make it floating or a separate toolbar, and it'll actually grid up for you. So, and that'll work in text mode as well. So again, just trying to set it up so that you, the user, can use this in whatever way is best for you. I'll change that back to icon mode. Personally, I've gotten so used to this, I can't use text mode very well. I'm always looking for icons. So this will go up into an horizontal or vertical, however you want. We just want everyone to know that that's available, get lots of questions on it. I'll keep it in text mode so you guys can see what I'm actually clicking on. Cool, so let's build some stuff. I showed you the cube. Cubes aren't very exciting. We want to build something a bit better. I'll delete that. We have a thing called polyshape that a lot of people aren't really familiar with. If I wanted to start building something on the side of this, I can just click on New Polyshape, and then as I click, it will start placing points for me. Hit the space bar and it pulls it right out. Once I've built it, I can still click and add more points. I can select a point and remove it. All sorts of fun things. That's not a really useful shape, but let's pretend it is as I run through this quickly. After you have built this, one thing to keep in mind is that you'll see in the inspector, you have an Edit Polyshape button. You can click to go back and continually edit it completely. However, if you go in and do any actual poly modeling, so I'm going to toss in some fancy stuff here. That's clearly the perfect shape. If I go and edit again, you lose that. And this is something that we are working towards, so you have sort of stacks. You can modify on top of modifies, but for now, just be aware of that. The idea is polyshape. If anybody happened to watch the old, some of our tutorials where you can build it up from a 2D sketch, it's great to use polyshape to just place all your points around, pull it up, and keep moving along from there. All right. get rid of that as well. The next thing when creating objects, so there's this theme here, we're going to start with creating. If you notice that every time you create something, it's floating up in the air, that's because currently ProBuilder uses the focal point that Unity has. So if I hold Alt and rotate, you can see I'm kind of rotating around this point, but little known trick, you can middle click and it sets your focal point. So if I middle click right about here, and then hit Control K, it'll actually pop it right there where I've clicked. That's also really useful just for navigating the scene view. So if I want to look at something over here, middle click, now when I Alt it and left click, it's rotating around that point. So there you just learned something for Unity as well. What are we doing on time? 3:40, cool. Okay, keep rolling. Smoothing on objects is something we don't see used a lot, but you can definitely do. So let's go back to this cube example here. If I wanted to make this a bit of a smoother shape, let's make it a bit larger, so I'll pull it up, add some size to it here. I want this to be more of a smooth wall. Pull this down, I'll throw in some corners here. I'm not going to tell you guys what I'm doing because that's not important right now, but I'm hitting Alt-E, I guess I will tell you, to throw in some edge cuts there. So I have this, and especially if I turn off lighting, you can see it's got a really faceted look to it. It's not exactly what I want. It's not curving across. So I'll go in and select each of these faces, holding Shift. Actually, if I were smarter, good example I can use. Over here in the, I'm showing with my hand, that's not helping. Over in the blue section, we have all the selection tools. If you look, there's a great one called Grow Selection. If you take this and set on the restrict to angle, I'll set this to something like 35, 35, and probably forget about it there and leave it. If you, again, have used other DCC tools, this is pretty standard. But now when I have a face selected and I hit Alt-G or click Grow, it'll just grow that selection out. So a huge amount of pain in 3D work is always selecting. I gotta keep clicking all these. That's a good one to get around it. So anyway, I want to smooth these faces. I have them selected. Open up the smoothing panel. And the way this works is similar to 3ds Max. You click a smoothing group and everything uses that same smoothing group. You can have up to 23 currently, may change or not. And now if I look at this, it's easier back in object mode. Unity is smoothing across that. You basically tricked it into thinking that you have a lot of topology there, which is great. You can have low poly, works great for mobile and such. From the side, of course, there's no fix for it from the profile, but you're gonna see that. I'll swap it back to the old mode so you can see just how it looks if I clear all of those. So again, that's otherwise just in that faceted look. So smoothing, again, we don't see a lot of people using it, but it's great. You can achieve some nice, tricky geometry looks with that. Selecting by, let's call it selecting by angle or moving edges along a face. So we added this very recently. It's something new. You can click on any face to select an edge. Obviously, you can see in the hover highlights here, we've got that. But if I change over here, orientation to local, if I click on the face, it will actually, oops, sorry, let me set this up properly. Better demo. So again, I have a little simpler object to demo this a little better and turn back on lighting so it looks prettier. If I click on a face where the edge is highlighting, it's going to grab the normal from that face, something we've had requested for a long time. So if I click on this face here, work for me. Sorry, meant to say normal there. Now we get the actual normal of that face so I can slide the edge along it. Super simple thing that every other DCC tool has, of course, like Max and Maya. We're working up to that still, but we just want to know, we want you guys to know that that's there and we're building up more and more toward it. Little things like that we've added in. Another item along there that we've added relevant to pivots and such is we now support the difference between pivot and center up here in the Unity controls. So in center mode, if I have, let's say, these two edges selected, the handle is in between what I have selected. It's at the center. If I change that to pivot, now the handle will go to the active element. What this means is I can rotate around that point versus previously you'd only have centers, so these are kind of rotating right around there. So that's very useful if you just want to hinge something, if you want to extrude towards a certain point specifically. A lot of great uses. We just added that in PB 4.0. Talked about grow selection, that's great. Vertex coloring, I've talked about that here and there, but it's something that we don't see a lot of people using still, and one of the best tricks for it, let's grab an existing item here. So let's say this area, I don't really have enough time or budget or something to really properly bake in AO. A neat way to do that is add an extra loop or two. So I'm gonna hit Alt-U in this case and add a quick little cheat loop here. We'll talk about how to fix those UVs that just went astray there later. And then I'll grab all these verts on the bottom. And let's just bake in some AO. So I'll pop open the Vertex coloring tool and I'll just apply a black so it's a really, really obvious one. And maybe I have the wrong shader. Oh no. It's always got to be one mistake, of course. Let's try this here. So this is what should have happened, right? So you can throw in this, and what's going to happen is you get this sort of faked in look that of course is going to shade and everything just fine. And if we really want to be a little better about this, that shouldn't be such a harsh black. Let's set it to something that, you know, matches just a bit darker than the rest. And just like that, you've kind of got some faked in AO. So you can do that around an entire level. Really make your performance a bit better and not have to bake that in. As well as it's great for overlaying colors and textures. If you want to add a little grunge to something, you can take an existing texture or anything that's on your object, as long as you're using a shader that supports vertex colors. So not the one that was on this object apparently. And apply some colors onto it. So it's also great for setting up like blue base versus red base or anything like that. Okay, I think we have about 5 minutes before we get to questions. Keep rolling. Setting pivot. We got a question about this, and it's also a pretty common problem. Maybe I have modified something like this, and my pivot. Let me pick one. I know there's one of these that's actually at a really bad spot. My pivot is way over there. Why is it there? That's bad. Just remember, you can always select any points on a PB object or multiple points. Wherever the handle is, you'll see it, is where your pivot is going to end up. You can just click Set Pivot. And now when I go back to object mode, the pivot is there. So that's really useful if you have something to animate. You can actually change the pivot in Unity. On top of that, remember, ProBuilder lets you do a ProBuilderize, which is actually what it's called in the menu here. So you can take an imported object you got from an artist or something off the asset store. Maybe you don't have access to Blender, etc. Or you just want to do a quick and dirty bit of work. You can ProBuilderize it, change the pivot, and now your animations might work a little better. You have that door hinging around the correct points. Or you can do any of these mesh edits to it as well. And of course, you can always export back to OBJ to end up back there. Cool, so you can do that, of course. Let's talk a little bit about UV editing. It's one of the items that I think a lot of people don't really get into because UV editing kind of sucks in general, I think. But we've tried to make some parts a bit easier. Let's look at this roof. It's a nice, big, obvious object here. If I open up the UV editor, there's a whole lot to look at. So I'll snap this off to the side and let's, gimme. Okay, fine, snap it onto the bottom. Bunch of faces sitting here, lots of tools. Again, let's ignore most of that. Turn on the in-scene editing button here. Oops, let's get a face selected. Turn on that in-scene editing button. And now the tool, you'll see the handle turns into a 2D tool. And I can just move the texture around on there. So you can do this in the UV editor. You can get full manual if you want. We have the basic tools that, again, Blender, Maya, etc. will have. But if you're just doing the basics, this is pretty great. Or if that's like wood grain and I want to make sure it works correctly, I can rotate it and snap it so it's going in the right direction. Or I could do a scale on it as well. So just, we want to give you access to the really simple stuff. Just get in there and do it. And then you're going to send it off, or if it's you yourself on a team, have it arted up in a larger tool. Make pretty, basically. Cool, so UV editing, we've got a couple minutes. Let's talk a little bit more on that. If you're working in here, you need to do something a little more complex. We'll just keep working with this. Let's say I've gotten this particular face up top here, perfect, and I just want to continue my UVs around, and I want to unwrap this to something complete that my artist or myself can, move this out of the way, can then render out a UV template and hand paint to have it just right. If you select that face, you've got, turn off that in-scene editing, hold Control and click, and it's going to do a thing called auto stitch, where now you can see it's actually building that along. Let me redo that a bit more. So if you look at the bottom on the UV area here, when I Control click, it actually builds out that face and auto stitches it right there, gets the correct orientation, planar maps it perfectly according to what you had started with up here. So Control Shift. So that's going to be a quick way to build it up, and then you grab, let's say, drag select that, and I'm going to use a quick fit UVs that pops it down into the UV editor here. And I could actually render out a template, then send that to artist or myself and hand paint that over. So you can go manual if you like. Otherwise, you can keep it as simple as you want. So let me check if I missed anything. I think we're moving on into question area. I do want to show one thing last. A lot of ProBuilder ends up being for static, simple stuff, but you can totally use it for completely dynamic work as well. We have one user I wanted to show, GladiaBots. This guy created an awesome game. All his bots, everything in the entire game are made using ProBuilder. Oh, that's right, I don't have internet. Anyway, I would check that out if you want to look at an example. It's all animated completely. You can totally do anything you want with ProBuilder. It does not have to be just static stuff. We like to make sure people know that. So cool, 10 minutes left. Take questions. I believe there's a microphone walking around here somewhere. Here, let's go ahead and raise a hand if you guys like me to go over anything a little better, or just ask.
With the PBR rendering workflow, I was wondering how to get ProBuilder to work with that new rendering pipeline, because every time I use ProBuilder, all the material is pink.
Get that nice, beautiful pink.
Yeah.
So technically, PB, so just on the back part of that, it's just a regular mesh, so you can use any mesh material shader at all, there's no problem. The problem is if you open up HDRP with some older versions of ProBuilder, it should be fixed in the newer one. There's no, we haven't yet built a HDRP compatible Vertex enabled shader, Vertex color enabled. So nowadays, when you open up PB or ProBuilder in the HDRP template, you'll get just the standard Unity material on there. So then you need to build your own shader that has Vertex coloring if you need that. We'll get that built as well, of course, soon.
Thank you.
Yeah, it should work perfectly. Just apply any other material for now. Sorry if you're having that problem.
Thank you.
This guy here? Just yell loud, yeah, or use that.
So what third-party tools can you export, import from?
What third-party tools can I export from?
Yeah.
You can use anything at all. There's no difference. So PB, I keep calling it PB because it's simpler and I'm trying to talk fast. Uses just a standard mesh, like I said, and you can pull in anything if you get off the asset store in it. As long as it is a mesh format that Unity reads, ProBuilder will read it. And when you export, you have a couple options. So you click the plus button here next to export, and you can choose OBJ, STL even. I use it a lot for 3D printing. PLY, just a regular asset within Unity. And if you have the FBX package within Unity, you can also export as an FBX and use that super great round-tripping tool that they've set up. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Cool. Over here.
Hi, I'm gonna kind of repeat myself from the last talk too, but like how scriptable is ProBuilder? Can I mean, I guess you kind of talked about it with the runtime game, but like I can just sort of emit new ProBuilder solids from mono behavior or something like that?
Kind of hard to hear because I think the speakers are going that way, but you're asking how easy is it to script within and what do you have control over with the PB runtime API? Is that correct? You have everything. We give you the complete set. There's actually quite a few examples and it's up on GitHub where you can just figure out how we've used it. There's like an audio reactive example and a couple other cool ones that you can use. And if you want a lot more info on that, you can, probably the best way is to connect with Carl Henkel. On Twitter, he's the Carl Henkel. I can give you that, and now everybody knows it. Hopefully he doesn't mind, but that's how Twitter works, I guess. But yeah, we love people to use that, so please connect with us and let us know what you'd like to know, and we will jump in and help you 100%. No other questions? I've got a couple other things in 6 minutes I can run through if you guys want. No questions, okay. What do I have written on my business card here? So we can talk about some things that people do wrong a lot, and I can maybe help you avoid it. That'll take about 6 minutes quick. Let's say I'm building, well, that's the first one we do wrong, right? I already told you that I should middle click first. I'm building something. I see a lot of times people will go to do an extrude like this. I want to make a doorway or something. I'm going to hold shift and pull this in sideways. And it looks like I've got a real nice setup here, but ProBuilder doesn't do a lot of hand holding. We just do what you tell us to. And in this case, you said extrude this face, which means that you actually have these extra faces on the top and the bottom, because technically, or sorry, inset, not extrude. you said take that whole face and extrude it. And the reason for this is when we try to get too smart, eventually we're going to break something, or you're going to think a certain thing is going to happen and it won't, and you're wondering what our auto stuff is doing. So we try to keep it very manual. So just remember, if you do something like an extrude inward, you then need to do a little bit of cleanup, remove these faces, weld in the verts. I see that a lot of times people will be wondering why they have extra faces floating around. Keep that in mind. Another thing I see fairly commonly is if you're setting up your object and you do something like, I'll just put a connect here, and now you've got this floating vertex or a T-junction or whatever it might be called here, and it's kind of just modeling the basics. But be careful of that, because you'll end up with some pretty weird, let's turn off the lighting, pretty weird UV and geometry stuff going on. If you need to fix that, you might need to just reset your tries specifically. So maybe I connect this one to there, and that way I have a nice quad on the left and a try on the right. So as I'm moving this around, I don't end up with that weird sort of stretchy look. If you have something going on where your UVs start moving around all over, doing something crazy, just open up that UV editor, select whatever faces you have, and there's a nice and handy reset UVs button. It'll kind of blast them back to what it thinks is a good auto. In this case, that's not very good. Let's go ahead and say group those selected UVs, and then maybe we even want to set an anchor, like a lower left or something. So now as I move things, I should have something that's a bit more predictable and sticking there to the left. I'd recommend definitely take a look at the tools in the UV editor there before you go to manual. Do everything you can with auto. It'll take care of most of the needs that you have, assuming you're just doing basic gray boxing. So you can see now the UVs there are stuck to the lower left as far as the global coordinates are concerned. We've got a couple more minutes. Don't want to take up too much time. Are there no more questions at all? Answer.
I was wondering, how did you connect the vertices again? Like the one vertex to the other? Was it just because you did it quickly? So
yeah, I did pretty quickly. So if you look into the toolbar on the left, you have the advanced options. The question, sorry, was that how do you connect verts and do a bit more advanced editing? Over here, you're going to see all your tools for editing based on what your current mode is. So if let's just move this up a bit, create something more complex. If I wanted to connect a few verts, select them and just click over here, connect verts. Or if I hold Shift, you're going to see you have the keyboard shortcut Alt-E is on the side there. And depending on what mode you're in, this is going to change, and also what you have selected. So right now, nothing is selected, so I can't actually use it. Once I select one edge, now I could see I could bevel it, I could do an extrude or a subdivide. Once I select two, connect becomes available. So we try to not show you too much information and also hide the stuff that's not actually useful while you're learning it there.
Alrighty, thank you, sir.
Cool. All right. One other thing that I can go through a quick common problem also is if you have built something and moved it around, of course, then the pivot ends up way back there. Again, you can reset, you can set the pivot to a point, or if you need to export this, and it's very important that something, if we take this further, like it's rotated, scaled, all this crazy stuff, we do have a freeze transform option. So if you click that, pivot's going to disappear off to the origin. It's going to be 0 rotation, 1 scale. It's really handy, especially for 3D printing, but also for if you just need to get it out to your artist in some way and you're not going to have scale on it and rotation that's messing with things. And also for if you're coding it or you need to have some sort of animation on it, it can be very handy to be able to freeze that transform so you don't have anything on it getting in your way. One last tip, we have 1 minute left. I would highly recommend that everybody, when you first start, take a look at all the different selection tools on the left in the blue. If you're having problems with something like drag select and it's selecting the back stuff but you don't actually want that, turn on and off select hidden. You can change the orientation of the handle that's selected. You can invert selection, lots of fun stuff. Select by color, select by material. Again, selecting stuff is a huge problem in 3D. It's just a pain, so we've at least started trying to do some things that'll help with that. Yeah, I think that concludes our talk. I hope I didn't run through that too quickly. Again, I will be right here or back at the answer booth or at Artist Tools. Any one of those spots you'll find me. If you have more questions, I'm always happy to talk. Show me what you're working on. And if you do have a game you're developing, please let us know. We love to add stuff to our demo reel. Doesn't matter what level or stage it's at. It's always good to see. So thanks everybody for coming. I hope that was pretty good and useful. Run through a whole pile of quick info. Hope to talk to you guys some more.